Hi, it's Jack, and this is the podcast version of this episode. If you want to read the words as they're being analysed, then if you're on Spotify, you can become a subscriber of this channel or head over to the YouTube channel. And on both platforms, you can also sign up to get exclusive episodes and early access to the regular weekly episodes too.
She's a sweetheart. She's a very sweet, kind girl. Just please be nice to her. Bring her home if you find her. Tell her that we love her.
That's Stephan Stearns, the last person to see his girlfriend's daughter, Madeline Soto, alive. And he's pleading for help to bring her back home because at this point, he said that she was missing. This week, Stearns was doing a different kind of pleading.
Stearns, how do you plea to first-degree premeditated murder in 24 CF 1293?
No contest.
And as to counts 1 through 8, how do you plead?
Guilty.
What kind of man was Stearns? Let's hear from a friend.
He was pretty normal around my house. I mean, he definitely had an Adderall addiction, you know. He didn't eat much, that I remember, and, you know, he stayed up all night. He would wake up, like, way later than, like, 4:30, 5 o'clock every day.
Stephan Stearns, seemingly normal guy, or was he hiding in plain sight? That's what we're going to look at in this episode from Never a Truer Word, where we look at the words that people choose to use to see if they're telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. What I do here is different from anywhere else because I'm only looking at the words that are said. I'm going to strip away everything else and focus in on those words and use my process of statement investigation to give you the key to seeing where deception is, where the truth is, and the motivations of a person. This is a process that I use with investigators, with the media, and with corporate clients to get a greater understanding of what's really being said. So, Madeline Soto, 13 years old, murdered by Stephan Stearns. Horrible, horrible situation. This week, Stearns received 21 life sentences. But what kind of man was he? He hasn't spoken much. I get the feeling the adults in Stearns' life knew a lot more about what was going on with Stephan than they even want to say. Stephan's not going to tell us, so let's look at what a friend has to say when a friend was interviewed shortly after the murder about his experiences with Stephan Stearns. And what we're going to look for here is repetitions, because what someone repeats shows what's a priority in their mind. So when he's talking about Stephan, the concepts and the ideas that this guy repeats are going to inform us of what his thoughts are on Stephan and what his experiences are of Stephan, because the things we repeat, you know, someone who bangs on about something all the time, that's an indication of what their priorities are. So when we keep a careful ear out for what people repeat, the concepts and the ideas, we can learn a lot about what is their thought processes. So let's go into this interview with Frank, who is a friend, or was a friend, of Stephan Stearns.
So how long have you known him?
Roughly like 3 years, maybe a little over. I met him playing, I got into Warhammer 40K at tabletop, like RPG game, and he was one of the people there, and I clicked with him right away because, you know, he smoked pot, and I was like, oh, okay, I can have someone to, you know, smoke a joint with and play some tabletop game. And after that, he was at my house, I mean, religiously, I would say every weekend, you know. He was always coming over. He's met my kids, met my wife. He's been to my, you know, my house multiple times. And, you know, I would have never expected, you know, I never noticed a sign, but I mean, he was always a quirky guy, but, you know, it's a nerdy game, so I just figured he was a nerd, you know?
So when you think back when he was coming over to your house, did you ever see him act a little strange with your kids now in hindsight?
No, like, not once. Not once, but also my kids are boys, and they're the ages of, you know, 3, and when he first met Johnny, 5, and my other son was just born, so, no, I didn't get that vibe from him.
Okay, so maybe they were outside of his range anyways.
Yeah, it seemed to me like he liked teenage girls. Especially after hearing the interview with his other friend, it seemed like he liked 12 to 14, 15-year-old girls.
Okay, so we've got Frank here describing his relationship with Stephan Stearns and his experiences of him. The question is asked of him, okay, so how long have you known him? And Frank says, roughly like 3 years, maybe a little over. And that deals with the question, how long have you known him? And he gives an answer there, 3 years, maybe a little over. So an indication here, he's being honest. He's not avoiding the question. He's not prevaricating around the question. He's giving a straight answer, 3 years, maybe a little over. And then he says how he met him. He goes extra. Now, often when someone goes extra, I'm very suspicious about them. Why are they saying more? Here, I think potentially there's a desire to please the interviewer, because that's what happens when you're interviewed. You're expected to talk a lot. Maybe he just wants to get ahead of some of the questions. Maybe what Frank wants to do is explain that this relationship was a very innocent relationship, that he had no inkling of what was going on with Madeline, no inkling that this guy he was having around his house was a potential murderer, and he wants to get out ahead of that. And what he says is, I met him playing, I got into Warhammer 40k, a tabletop like RPG game, and he was one of the people there, and I clicked with him right away because, he smoked pot, and I was like, oh, okay, I could have someone, smoke a joint with and play some tabletop game. So potentially here, it was kind of a character reference, isn't it, that he's giving Stephan Stearns here. This is the first thing that comes to my head. This is the priority that I'm going to say when I talk about Stephan Stearns. And I've got to say, if that was a character reference someone was giving me, I wouldn't be overly pleased with it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with smoking pot. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with playing games like Warhammer. What I am saying is that all Stephan Stearns was known for? Nothing about his character or his personality. He was a lovely guy. He was a friendly guy. He was a very funny guy. There's nothing there at all. It's about what he did, Warhammer, games and smoke pot, rather than who he is as a person. Now, that's a very male way of describing people, by the way. It tends to be men who describe what people do, and women would tend to describe who people are. Emotionally and sort of spiritually. But there we go. That's it in a nutshell. Stephan Stearns played games, smoked pot. Could also be the fact that Frank is wanting to do some curation here around his experiences with Stearns, because if he was up to things with Stearns, now I'm not saying anything illegal, just things that all of a sudden, with hindsight, knowing what Stearns has done, I don't want to pass on to people, then potentially that's what's going on here as well. He's curating what he's going to tell us about Stephan Stearns. Last thing I'm going to notice in this intro here is the pronouns. You'll see that Frank talks about himself as I got into Warhammer. I clicked with him right away. I was like, okay, I could have someone to smoke a joint with. And separately, Stephan Stearns is slightly separate with him because he is he in this telling. So he was one of the people there. He smoked pot. So we've got I and he, a slight separation there. There's not a we, there's not a unity there, which is interesting. It suggests maybe not the closest of relationships going on, certainly around all of this, because it's I and he. There was no we in there whatsoever. So he carries on. After that, he was at my house. I mean, religiously, I would say every weekend, he's always coming over. Now, if this is curation, this is interesting curation, because what he's saying here is I was quite happy to have Stephan Stearns at my house a lot. Religiously is the very first way he talks about it, as if it was like a religious practice to go round to the house every weekend. I would say every weekend. Well, that's a lot to have someone come round your house, especially that you met 3 years ago, to be involved that quickly. Interesting. Again, I'm not saying anything nefarious. I'm just saying interesting. He's always coming over. So Stephan Stearns came over to his house a lot. You'll notice that what Frank wants to talk about is Stephan coming to his house. He's not talking about going to Stephan's house, not talking about meeting anywhere else either. He wants to talk about Stephan coming over to his house. Then he says, he's met my kids, met my wife. He's been to my house, multiple times. So we have, once again, him wanting to say, and he said it a lot, that Stephan Stearns was at his house a lot, my house multiple times. He's been at his house a lot, religiously, every weekend, always, multiple times. He's there a lot. You'll actually notice there, religiously suggests once a week, because that's the typical frequency of religious visits somewhere. Every weekend, again, is once in a week. Always coming over. Well, that's a little bit more vague, but that's like all the time. And then multiple times just feels a little bit softer, doesn't it? But first thing he said in that extract there is, he's met my kids, met my wife. Ordering is always important. The first thing we mention is usually the priority that we have. The second thing is the second priority, and so on. Things get lower in priority the further down a list they go. or it can be chronological order. So he's met my kids, met my wife. The normal phrase we expect to hear is wife and kids. I've got a wife and kids. He met my wife, met my kids, but no, he puts his kids first. It's the top priority in his head of what he's thinking about that Stephan Stearns has met, unless it was his kids first and his wife second. And this, by the way, is the only mention of his wife, I think, in this entire interview. That one that Stephan Stearns has met my wife. He's been to my house, my house multiple times. And, I would have never expected, I never noticed a sign. So he came to my house multiple times. I would have never expected, and he finishes that thought, or he bails out of that thought. I never would have expected, what is he going to say? Him to do something like this, him to be in trouble like this, him to have had a relationship with Madeline like this. He pulls out of that thought. Expected is an interesting choice there. I never would have expected. I never would have thought. Just never would have expected. And then he says, I never noticed a sign. It's not there were no signs. It's not he was a regular guy. There was nothing to pick up on. It's I never noticed a sign. If you never noticed something, that suggests in your head that it was there. You just didn't notice it. I didn't notice the person step out in front of my car. They were there. They stepped out in front of the car. You just didn't notice them. I never noticed a sign. Suggests to me that he has in his head the concept that there were signs there. It's just he never noticed them. He just didn't notice them. But I mean, he was always a quirky guy. But it's a nerdy game, so I just figured he was a nerd, Okay, so he was always a quirky guy. That's going to become interesting as we go through some of the other things that Frank says. So just bear that one in your mind. He was always a quirky guy. You'll notice always comes before it. So always a quirky guy, nothing regular about him. That's what always a quirky guy means. But it's a nerdy game. That's Warhammer. So I just figured he was a nerd, Now just figured means that you worked it out. It's in the past tense here. Just figured. So what he's saying is explicitly, he noticed these quirks, he noticed he was a quirky guy, and he thought about it, couldn't place it for a while, and then figured he was a nerd, Starting to build up a picture of what Stephan Stearns was like, I think, from Frank's words, despite how curated they may be. The interviewer asks Frank, so when you think back to when he was coming over to your house, did you ever see him act a little strange with your kids now in hindsight? He says, no, like not once. Now that's a lot of ways of saying no, not once. He wants to be really hugely emphatic that no, not once did he have those thoughts. Did he think he was a little strange with his kids? He wants to make sure he gets that across. Now, why is that? Is that because he wants to create an image of himself as a very good dad? And if he did notice these things, there's no way he would have let this guy near his kids. Or is it that he had reservations. He was trying to figure out what Stearns was quirky around. But he now thinks it's much more in his interest to say, no, everything was fine. But he's hugely emphatic there. Also, my kids are boys and they're the ages of, 3. And when he first met Johnny, 5. And my other son was just born. So no, I didn't get that vibe from him. He stutters on I didn't. He's having trouble saying what he's going to say next. I didn't get that vibe from him. Now, he says he didn't get that vibe because his kids were boys. How did he know Stearns' preferences? How did he know everything that Stearns was into? Because we now know a lot about what Stearns was into. To say that you didn't get a vibe from Stearns means because your kids are boys means you got to have some feeling for what Stearns' preferences were. How did you know that, Frank? I'd be interested in that. The interviewer says, okay, so maybe they were outside of his age range anyways. And Frank says, yeah, it seemed to me like he liked teenage girls, especially after hearing the interview with his other friend. It seemed like he liked 12 to 14, 15-year-old girls. So seemed is the bit that's interesting there. It's not it seems to me. So if you had just learned all these things that Stephan was into, you'd be using the present tense. Yeah, it seems to me he liked teenage girls, but he's using the past tense. It seemed to me he liked teenage girls. So that suggests to me that this was in the past, that he had some knowledge that Stearns liked teenage girls when he was hanging out with them, because that's why that seemed past tense would be in there. The only caveat to that would be, especially after hearing doing the interview with his other friend. Now, I don't know which one he's referring to. This interview is taken from a lot of interviews with friends of Stern's, people who knew him in childhood, people who knew him in adulthood. So potentially he's drawn that conclusion after hearing another interview with a friend. But even then, I would expect it seems present tense to be the tense that he would use there. It seems he liked teenage girls because I've just learned it and I'm feeling that right now. Not seemed to me. Now, what have I got in this very first part of this interview? Real sense of immaturity from Stephan Stearns with these Warhammer games and this smoking pot. I'm not saying, again, there's anything wrong with them, but if that's your entire character, it's slightly immature, not very rounded way of being. I think we've got some self-soothing here from Frank of saying there was nothing, I didn't spot anything up, there was never any signs, but things like I didn't notice the signs and he seemed like teenage girls. Did Frank know more? Now, Stephan Stearns been big news this week because of 21 life sentences for what he did, which was damn horrible. I've got a feeling, and I've got a playlist of the Madeline Soto case looking at the words of some of the people around there. I've got a feeling Madeline was really let down by some of the adults in her life, people who could have protected her more from someone like Stephan Stearns. If you've any interest in me breaking down some more people talking about Stephan Stearns, then do let me know in the comments here. The more likes and the more views this video gets, then the more I think there's some interest in covering this one in more detail. So do let me know if you would like to get some more on Stephan Stearns. For example, more of his friends have spoken. Also, we have jail calls with his parents as well, which I think may be very revealing about what came to make the monster that is Stephan Stearns. Let's go back to the interview with Frank.
Well, the thing is he had pictures on his phone of CSAM material with Madeline at the age of, I think, 9 or 10.
Really? I mean, is that confirmed that it was her?
Yeah. It said it. Well, they didn't put the name on it, but you could tell that's what they were referring to.
It was the house. Yeah, it was the house. So that's what I figured.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't get that weird vibe from him, honestly. You know, he was pretty normal around my house. I mean, he definitely had an Adderall addiction. You know, he didn't eat much, that I remember, and you know, he stayed up all night. He would wake up like way later than like 4:30, 5 o'clock every day. So,
okay. Starting to get concerned here. Well, the thing is, he had pictures on his phone of CSAM material with Madeline at the age of, I think, 9 or 10. And Frank says, really? I mean, did that confirm that it was her? That's a question to a question. Is that him buying some time, or is that him just trying to find out some more information? But he seems to have a little bit of knowledge there about what the material was. Did that confirm that it was her? Or maybe he just wants more information. The interviewer says, yeah, well, it said it. Well, they didn't put the name on it, but you could tell that's what they were referring to. And Frank says, it was the house. Yeah, it was the house. So that's what I figured. So no, I didn't get that weird vibe from him, honestly. You know, he was pretty normal around my house. Repeated concepts. The word house comes up around here. It was the house. It was the house. Now, it was the house. I believe what he's saying here is they identified the pictures from the house. How does he know the house was in them? I don't know, and I'd be interested in finding out some more about that. How does he know that it was identified as being Madeline from the house? So that's what I figured. Again, this is past tense. So he's saying in the past now. That could be just before the interview, or it could be longer term. He figured that for some reason the house gave it away, or the house would give it away. He stutters again over I didn't. So no, I didn't get that weird vibe from him, honestly. So he stutters over I didn't. He's got some difficulty saying it, maybe forming his next words. I didn't get that weird vibe from him. Not I didn't get a weird vibe from him or any weird vibe from him. It's that weird vibe. Now, what is that? I could go two ways on this one. It could be that now he's found out some more about Stearns. He didn't get that from him. He didn't know he was up to that. Or is it that weird vibe that he knows there was a weird vibe, but he just is wanting to tell us now, I didn't get that weird vibe from him. And then he puts honestly at the end of it. That honestly is used by someone who really wants to assure us of their honesty. They really want to persuade us they're being honest. Sometimes that can be because someone is lying, and they feel like saying, I'm being honest, honestly, makes their lie seem more believable. And sometimes it can come from someone, and I think this might be the case here, from someone who is under pressure to be honest and to get across what was going on. So they will try to tell us, look, I am being honest here. honestly, this is what happens. I think it's the latter, but I'm open to it being the former. You know, he was pretty normal around my house. House comes up again. House is going to come up a lot. Living arrangements are going to come up a lot from Frank. But look how qualified this was. He was pretty normal around my house. So just pretty normal, not totally normal. Now remember, he was always quirky, but now he's trying to say he was pretty normal. Just not totally normal, just pretty normal and around my house. Very qualified. He was only pretty normal and only around Frank's house. So I think I'm really open to the fact that Frank knew that this guy was at the very least a weirdo. Then he goes on to say, he definitely had an Adderall addiction, you know, he didn't eat much that I remember. You know, he stayed up all night. He could wake up like way later than like 4:30, 5 o'clock every day. So here, look, as much as he wants to say pretty normal, then we do have quirky, we do have addictions, we do have up all night, asleep all day, all things that are not normal. As much as Frank wants to say he was pretty normal, he does not think that Stearns was pretty normal at all. Now, the interview moves on to the fact of was Stearns working or was Stearns not working?
Okay, that was 3 years ago? That was 3 years ago?
Yeah, when I first met him, he didn't work that whole time until he went to Kissimmee, moved in with Jen, and they got back together because they had split up at one point. And then he moved back into his parents. I always thought that was weird, that he lived at his parents, woke up whenever he wanted, but had money to buy these expensive Warhammer stuff. I was like, this doesn't add up. His parents giving him money. I didn't really know.
So we're here there. Okay, that was 3 years ago, those 3 years. Frank says, yeah, when I first met him, he didn't work that whole time until he got to Kissimmee. Moved in with Jen and they got back together because they had split up at one point. Very back and forward, this one, in terms of like when things actually happened. It's all a bit up in the air in terms of the timeline that Frank gives us. He didn't work that whole time until he went to Kissimmee, moved in with Jen, and they got back together because they had split up at one point. It's back and forward. And then he moved back to his parents. Again, just more of this weird timeline. I always thought that was weird that he lived with his parents. So again, I always thought that was weird. Now, this guy's tried to say he was pretty normal around my house, but again, he's brought up more things that were weird. I thought it was weird that he lived at his parents. Again, when I talk about Stearns always being described as immature, childlike, lived at his parents is another thing that comes through here from what Frank says. And this is, for me, is about what kind of person was Stearns? Immature, childlike, I think it's very much there. He lived at his parents. Woke up whenever he wanted, but had money to buy this expensive stuff. I was like, this doesn't add up. His parents giving him money. I didn't really know. So this doesn't add up, but he knows his parents give him money. I was like, I didn't really know. So that's like, yeah, I kind of knew there. So yeah, all very interesting. It's not very flowing, this part, is it? I can't get a real good mental picture of what it is he's describing. But what I do get is he's brought in the word weird to describe Stephan Stearns on top of quirky, nerdy. We do have pretty normal, but weird there. He really thought that Stearns was a bit of an unusual person, lived at his parents, and this doesn't add up. Yeah, so can you tell me the situation with, you know, when they call each other girlfriend and then stepfather, and he says they are not. They are not. Now, he says it twice, but it's very emphatic, and I kind of believe it. They're not. They are not. He does say it a little bit formally. He really does want us to believe that, but he's very cast iron in his view that that was not what has happened. That's what I'm confused about. Is why I don't know who said they were together, but that's not true, because they've been broken up within like 6 months of him moving there. So like within 6 months of him moving there and working at Disney, they were broken up. So again, the timeline, I'm not saying it doesn't hang together, just the way he's telling it is very strange. Chaotic, I think, is a way of saying it. Working at Disney gets mentioned. Again, working at Disney, nothing wrong with that, but, you know, it's a very interesting occupation for someone who is immature and childlike. I think there's a lot more to say about that as well. That's why he moved back to his parents in Northport, because he's been living for the past couple of months. Okay, so maybe you can help clarify that and explain a little bit better. So he did work at Disney after you guys met though, right? Yeah, he worked at Disney. He moved to back there like a year and a couple of months. I can't say an exact, number on that, but that's when he did move back, and then again within a short period of time, and they were split up again, and he was staying supposedly in a spare bedroom. Now, you'll notice here the question is about work. Did he work at Disney? Did he not work at Disney? Was he working? Was he not working? And the answer we get is much more about his living arrangements. Now, I told you the word house was really important to Frank. What we have here is similar to house. It's living arrangements. He worked at Disney, so he starts to answer the question, and then it's he moved to, so it's where Stearns lived. It's what the living arrangements were. Then he moved back, and they were split up again, and he was staying in supposedly a spare bedroom. Now, I'm guessing this is at Jen's house, and he stayed at supposedly a spare bedroom. So not in a spare room or a spare bedroom, but supposedly. So supposedly, I get the impression there Frank has been told something, but now doesn't believe that's what it was. So I think the word supposedly is, I was told it was a spare bedroom, but now I'm going to say it was supposedly a spare bedroom. Well, why does he think supposedly? Why does he think there's some difference between what he was told and what he now thinks, feels, or knows? Supposedly a spare bedroom. Does he know that it wasn't? But the questions are about work, and he focuses on living arrangements there. It's so interesting. I'm very unclear on the timelines, though, from Frank. It's all very chaotic. Was he suspicious? Was it that he thought at the time, it's supposedly a spare bedroom, but is he telling me the truth? We'll see some more from Frank as he goes on. Now, listen, Frank is not telling us the full truth, is he? And this is happening to you all the way through your life. People are just holding things back. I'm giving you the key to seeing that little bit deeper. This is about hearing the world with new ears, and I'm on a mission to share this skill with as many people as possible. So if you want that to be you, if you want to unlock that secret, subscribe to this channel or follow it. That means you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Also, you can delve into the archives. There's a treasure trove of cases waiting to be explored. And if you know someone who needs this, someone who deserves to hear the truth or to find out about the motivations of a person, hit the like button. It helps that get out to more people. Or share this to someone who you think needs it or would appreciate hearing this. Just recommend it, pass it on, because every click, every single share fuels the fire. It allows me to dig deeper, analyze further, and bring this life-changing skill to even more people. Let's go back and hear some more from Frank.
And it's strange because she allowed him to, the mother allowed him to come back to give her a ride to school for some reason.
Well, yeah, he was like, okay, this what didn't make sense to me either. Like, there's something like when we hung out 2 weekends or a weekend before this all transpired. I introduced him to a couple friends. My friends liked him. He was on the outside a normal person, and like a very giving person. Like you wouldn't think this if you met him. But if out of this was out of context, take this whole thing out of the conclusion, you wouldn't think so. You just think the guy had a social problem and he was a nerd and he kept to himself. So
it was kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing, basically.
Oh, 100%. But yeah, he said, I don't know where he's moving back there, but what he said, that weekend, he said something. Yeah, he mostly felt bad about the breakup because of Madeline, because they created a strong bond. So I really don't know about he wanted to go back there. He was supposed to go there that weekend that we hung out, but didn't. He went the following weekend, I guess.
So here we have Frank being asked. It's strange because she allowed him, and I presume this is Jen, she allowed him, the mother allowed him to come back to give her a ride to school for some reason. He says, well, yeah, he was like, and then he stops. He was like, he's going to tell us something about Stephan there and thinks better of it. He was like, okay, this one didn't make sense to me either. So despite this, he was pretty normal. We've got something else that doesn't make sense to Frank. He was hanging around with a guy either he barely knew, he just went, this is a weird guy, but I'm going to go with it anyway, or he liked the weirdness, but all of a sudden he really wants to create some distance from himself there. So this one didn't make sense to me either. Either implies just one more thing that doesn't make sense. So really, despite this, he was pretty normal around my house. Lots of things not normal about Stearns to Frank. There's something like we hung out 2 weekends or a weekend before this. Now remember at the very beginning I talked about pronouns. It was I and he. Here we have we. This is showing unity. This is showing them doing something together, a closeness there that they did this together. We hung out 2 weekends or a weekend before this. We hung out. Again, yeah, I know people hang out, but again, it's just this slight immaturity there in the language. We hung out 2 weekends or a weekend before this all transpired, you know. Now, what's this? This is finding out that Stearns had a very, very horrible relationship with Madeline and also killed her. Downplayed there to this by Frank before this all transpired. Just transpired. Okay, which is different from happened. Transpired is the end of something. This is all something coming out there. But he's downplaying it. Now, why is that? Is it because he doesn't want to think about it? Because he really wants to distance himself from the bad things that Stephan Stearns has done, but he is doing some downplaying there. I introduced him to a couple of friends. My friends liked him. You know, he was, you know, on the outside, a normal person. I'm sorry, what? On the outside, a normal person. Frank has spent this entire interview telling us how weird he was, how nerdy he was, how things did not add up, how he could not understand some things that were going on in Stearns' life. He was on the outside a normal person. Now, again, we have this qualified thing of it's only on the outside a normal person, suggesting that on the inside, far from normal, and like a very giving person. Now, that's the first time he said anything about his personality beyond being weird and not getting vibes and stuff like that from him. A very giving person. Don't know what he gave because he doesn't expand on this whatsoever. Doesn't say how the giving happened. He doesn't say generous person or very giving of his time or anything else. It's just a very bland fact. He was a very giving person. I'd be interested to know more. In what way was Stearns a very giving person that Frank saw? Very normal person, a very giving person. Like you wouldn't think this if you like met him. So it's not I didn't think this. It's like if you met him, I think so. I think this is about on the outside. If you just met him, if you wouldn't think if you like met him. Yeah. So again, he's not saying I thought he was dead normal. What he's saying is he looked normal. It's a very qualified kind of normal, and I understand why he wants to get normal across because he's curating. Because if he is able to say to us, I thought everything was normal. No one points any fingers or looks in any way strangely at Frank. If Frank can say, as far as I could see, everything was normal, but his words belie the fact that it wasn't normal. If you met him, if this was out of context, like take this whole thing out of the conclusion, you wouldn't think so. So we've got, again, this you and I, he pulls out of saying I wouldn't, and it's you wouldn't think so. Think what? You don't expand on it. You just think the guy had a social problem and he was a nerd and kept to himself. So just there is interesting. Just is trying to minimize something and just focus us on what's about to being said rather than the greater picture. And that just is the guy had a social problem. He was a nerd and kept to himself. So on the outside, he was a normal person, but you would just think he had a social problem. He was a nerd and kept to himself. So not even on the outside was he a normal person. He had a social problem and kept to himself. Look, Frank, this is not the description of a normal person that you are giving. He's asked, so he basically was like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Oh, 100%, 100%. But yeah, he said, I don't know where he's moving back there. So again, we've got this focus on where Stearns lives and all this moving that Stearns was doing, moving back there. And he's never very precise about where the there is. I don't know where the there is. Is that his parents or is that Jennifer Soto's house? I think he means Jennifer Soto's, but he's not very descriptive with any of this. But like what he said, like that weekend, he said something. He mostly felt bad about the breakup because of Madeline, because they created a strong bond. So I don't really know about, like, you know, he wanted to go back there. He was supposed to go that was a weekend that we hung out, but he didn't. He went the following weekend, I guess. So getting more chaos in this storytelling from Frank. He does talk about feeling bad about the breakup because of Madeline, because they created a strong bond. Again, he's saying there's something a bit off about Stearns, or a bit not normal about Stearns. This was something else that he noticed there. So just not normal, really. And that was the weekend we hung out. So we've got that joint pronoun there of we. It wasn't like I hung out with him or he hung out with me and my friends, I guess. So there, we've got the downplaying of the crime, talking about this and transpiring. He describes anything but a normal person. As much as Frank wants to say there were no signs and there were nothing, no red flags, he does not describe a normal person at all when he's describing Stephan Stearns. And for some reason, I know not why, but for Frank, Stephan Stearns' living arrangements are a real high priority.
Was he the only one claiming they weren't in a relationship? Because how do you know that Jen thought that?
That's what he said, that he was staying in a spare bedroom there. So that's the information I have. And he lives back at his parents. So that seems to me, he was staying, he moved there because they were getting back together.
Why was he back over at Jen's house recently?
I guess her birthday. I can't think of, that was the reason that I thought, that I was told.
Well, I guess that's true. The birthday party was the night before.
Yeah.
So here, how did was he the only one claiming they weren't in a relationship? I think this is about him and Jen, because how do you know that Jen thought that? Says Frank, and then changes it to, that's what he said. That's what he was staying in a spare bedroom there. So that's the information I have. And he lives back at his parents. So that seems to me, he he moved back there because they were getting back together. Now, this is a question about the relationship, the status of the relationship. And what we get is more chaos around living arrangements. I'll try and break it down for you, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. That's what he said, that he was staying in a spare bedroom there. So let's go to that he's the one that they weren't in a relationship. Stearns is saying they weren't in a relationship because he was staying in a spare bedroom there. And we have more information about this spare bedroom. And the information came from Stearns that it was a spare bedroom. So that's the information I have. And he lives back at his parents. So it seems to me, he moved there because they were getting back together. Don't really understand it. I think what I really know is that from Frank's point of view, Stearns' relationship status is built on the living space that he occupied at the time, and he's not just very clear about where Stearns was living. He's asked, why was he back over at Jen's house recently? That I guess her birthday. I can't think of, that was the reason that I thought that I was told. I guess her birthday there. Now, the question is about Jen, but it was Madeline's birthday, wasn't it, that Stephan Stearns went back for? So he's zoned in on Madeline there with that answer. It's not Jen's birthday, it's Madeline. And he just refers to Madeline as her, not Madeline's birthday or not Jen's daughter's birthday or anything like that. He's gone straight there to Madeline with the her. Well, I guess if that's true, the birthday party was the night before. Yeah. So here we have, again, the living arrangements defining relationship status, which is very strange to me. And also that focus on Madeline there. Let's get some more from Frank.
So you guys would play Warhammer quite a bit, right?
Yeah, Warhammer, a couple tabletop card games like Magic the Gathering type of games.
Now, what's that other game that he's really into with that little sort of game toy that he plays with?
Oh, Tamagotchi.
Tamagotchi.
Yeah, I always thought that was weird. He's almost 40.
Yeah, it seems like something to sort of relate with children type of a game.
Yeah, but also he had a lot of weird stuff, like, his room, it was nerdy, he was a gamer, so he had a lot of weird stuff. Like Star Wars memorabilia, Tamagotchis, Nerf guns, things like that.
Okay, so it did nothing set off alarm bells for you.
No, I just thought he was a nerdy guy,
So here we have, would you guys play Warhammer quite a bit, right? Yeah, Warhammer, a couple of tabletop card games like Magic of the Gathering type games. What was that other game he was really into? That little sort of game toy he plays with? Oh, Tamagotchi. So again, we've got something childlike or immature about Stephan Stearns here, is that he played Tamagotchi, which is traditionally a children's toy. And then Frank says, yeah, I always thought that was weird. He's almost 40, so I always thought that was weird. So always and weird come through a lot. Weird comes through a lot. So as much as he's wanting to say, hey, this was just a regular guy who was a little bit nerdy, so much that Frank is saying that he knows about Stearns, he thought was weird. Still hung out with him, but he thought, again, another thing was weird. The interviewer says, yeah, seems like something to sort of relate to children type of game. Yeah, but also he had a lot of weird stuff. So the weirdness just keeps growing. He had a lot of weird stuff. Like, his room, it was nerdy, He was a gamer, so he had a lot of weird stuff, like Star Wars memorabilia, Tamagotchi, Nerf guns, things like that. So again, weird is the word that Frank is his go-to word to describe Stephan Stearns. He had a lot of weird stuff. He had a lot of weird stuff is what he says. So weird, despite this, pretty normal. Never noticed any signs. He saw a lot of weird stuff. You notice he's talking about living arrangements again. He's talking about Stearns' room. And I want to know which room did he see and how he saw it. So he's saying he had this supposedly spare bedroom at Jen's house. He lived at Jen's house as a couple at some point, I think, and he lived at his parents' house. So where was this place that you define as his room, and how did you see it? Because what you've spoken about is Stearns coming to your house a lot. You've talked about hanging out. You haven't said where that is. I think we will get a story about them hanging out in a bar, but you didn't say where the hanging out happened, whether it was his house, somewhere else. Could be that he's a gamer, he saw online streaming from the room, but he doesn't say how he knows this room. He doesn't even say where this room is, what he defines as Stearns' room. Okay, so did nothing set alarm bells for you, which is, Tamagotchis, all this nerdy stuff, everything like that? No. Something I couldn't make out what he said. Thought he was a nerdy guy, so that's his go-to again. So everything he has to say about Stearns is weird and very regularly, almost exclusively, childish or immature. But he likes to class it as nerdy. Well, that's not nerdy in the classic behavior of this. Yeah, nerds might like to collect things. They might like to know lots of facts about things. They might like to spend a lot of time on something. But this is not quite nerdy, is it? It's childish, it's immature. And actually, the word that you use most, Frank, is Stearns was weird.
So about 6 months, they break up. And then where does he go after that?
He's living there still, working at Disney. So he supposedly stayed in the guest room or something.
Oh, wow. Okay,
that's what I was told. Mm-hmm. That's what I was told.
All right, they broke up, but he still lived there. Okay.
Yeah.
And
I always thought that was really weird.
That is pretty strange,
Yeah, why would you want to stay in a place if you guys no longer are in a relationship? But
Well, I think we might know the answer because he wanted to still be close to.
That's 100%. Yeah, that's what I feel like.
All right, so tell me more about him. Did you ever see him, when he was talking about women or?
That's what I was going to bring that up. There was a woman. We went out that night. I introduced some friends. We all hung out at a bar called Dean's with some music. Like a older woman, a cougar, was 100% hitting on him. And he's single, so I was like, dude, you should grab up on that, man. Go get some. And he just was like, nah, not interested. And I just, it made me turn my head a little bit. Like, what do you mean not interested? She was just looking for some. And if I was a single guy, why not? Who cares? And he was just not interested. And that always, rattled my brain. Like, what? What do you mean not interested? Now I know why he wasn't interested. She wasn't in his age range. She was 50 years too young. And then also another thing he had said, I knew it was a lie why he was saying, because he's no good at lying. It was just he was telling us he had some girl from Disney, some spicy Latina. I was like, no, don't believe that for a second. So he definitely lied. That's a lie that I caught him in. I never said anything to him because, let him talk. Whatever, but I don't think that's true. Because why, if you're already broken up with this woman, why the heck would she be letting you bring random women to her house?
Right.
So it's just a lie. It was 100% a lie, just to look cool and maybe not seem normal.
It seemed normal is how it finishes it, but again, the story is anything but normal. So about 6 months ago, they break up. Where does he go after that? He's living there still, working at Disney, so he supposedly stayed in the guest room or something. So we've got, again, the fact he's not really sure about these living arrangements. We've got this supposedly stayed in the guest room. Why does he doubt the fact that he was staying in the guest room? Is it what's come out recently, or was there something else happening at the time? He's supposedly stayed in the guest room or something. Okay, wow, so that's what I was told. That's what I was told. So he really is very keen for us to know that he didn't have any more information on this other than that's what he was told. Doesn't say who told him that. I presume he infers that it's Stearns, but he doesn't say that, so we shouldn't assume it. All right, they broke up, but he still lives there, okay? Yeah. I always thought that was really weird. We've got that weird word again. What he thinks about Stephan Stearns is he was weird. I always thought that was really weird. He's always thought things were really weird, and yet didn't see any signs, didn't think anything of it. That is pretty strange, says the interviewer. Yeah. Why would you want to stay in a place if you guys are no longer in a relationship? But yeah, Well, I think now we know the answer to that because he wanted to still be close to, and we know where that's going. That's 100%. Yeah, that's what I feel like, All right. So tell me more about him. Did you ever see him, when he was talking about women and he doesn't say how he talks about women. He actually goes into an experience that they had. Let's break that down. But note that he doesn't say very much about how Stearns would talk about women. That's what I was going to bring up. There was a woman we went out that night. So we went out. So again, we've got this unity in the pronouns showing that he quite happily did things with Stephan Stearns. There was no divisions there whatsoever. We went out that night. Don't know which night that night refers to, but we went out that night. I introduced some friends. We all hung out. So again, Unity, friends, Stearns and Frank at a bar called Dean's with some music, like an older woman, a cougar. It was 100% hitting on him, and he's single. So I was like, dude, you should grab up on that man, go get some. And he was just like, nah, not interested. And I just it made me turn my head a little bit. Like, what do you mean not interested? He was just looking for some. And then he pulls out of that thought. He doesn't finish it. What was he looking for? And he is Stearns, I think. So he was just looking for some what? And if I was single guy, why not? Who cares, And he was just not interested. And that always rattled my brain. Like, what? What do you mean not interested? That always rattled my brain once again. Yeah, just not happy with Stearns. Things just didn't sit right with him. Now I know why he wasn't interested. She wasn't his age range. She was like 50 years too young. Let's break that down. He meant to say 50 years too old. I'm pretty damn sure he meant to say 50 years too old. And this is just a misspeak, young on his mind, because that's what Stearns liked. But also that 50 is interesting because 15 was the top, 12 to 15 was the age range that we were given. So if it's 50 years too old, this cougar was in her 60s. Very possible. Probable. And also another thing he had said, I knew was a lie. Why he was saying it, because he's no good at lying. He's no good at lying. How do you know he's no good at lying? Some people think that we know people are no good at lying because we catch them out in lies all the time. We don't know how many lies they actually get past and we don't catch. He's no good at lying. But also, let's just look at the situation Frank's in when he's talking. He's just learned that his mate, he's been a friend for 3 years, has been doing things to Madeline that are unspeakable, presumably hidden. Presumably he never spoke about any of those things at all. And also, he's murdered Madeline, something that Frank is trying to say I had no idea he was capable of. And yet he says Stephan Stearns was no good at lying. Why is that something he thinks about him? Well, because one or two things are true. He was very good at lying and you never knew any of this. Or I thought he was no good at lying. Turns out that he was very good at lying. But a very worrying turn of phrase there from Frank. It was just like he was telling us he had some girl from Disney, some spicy Latina. And I was like, no, don't believe that for a second. So he definitely lied. He definitely lied. That's a lie I caught him in. I never said anything to him because, let him think, let him talk, whatever. So it was definitely a lie and he's no good at lying, but only, I think it was a lie. I never actually proved it was a lie. I never found out what the truth was. But why, if you're already broken up with this woman, why the heck would she be letting you bring random women to her house? So this woman is Jen. This woman has a bit of disdain for Jen in there. I think this woman is not calling her something close like her name, or saying his ex-girlfriend. It's this woman. Why the heck would she be letting you bring other random women to her house, you know? So it's just a lie. It was 100% a lie, just to like look cool, you know, maybe even, you know, not be seen normal. So Stearns, he thinks, was lying about having a relationship in order that he seemed normal. So he couldn't have seemed normal for everything you've said. He was just pretty normal. Again, another indication that Stephan Stearns came across to Frank as anything but normal. So look, Stearns and Frank did not have a relationship based on respect for women. You can tell by the way that Frank talks about women, the way he talks about them in that whole extract there. Frank, if you're ever seeing this, did not like the way you spoke about women in there whatsoever, and also the interactions that you had with Stephan Stearns around women, spicy Latinas and so on. Not quite happy with that either. And look, the big one for me there is Stephan Stearns is no good at lying, and yet, Frank, you've discovered that he's been telling you some huge, huge lies. What's going on?
Is there anything that you, when you were sitting around going, oh, wow, yeah, what about this?
Yeah, mostly that cougar thing. The being with the communication with the ex-girlfriend's daughter, wanting to go back to your ex's house to be at your ex-girlfriend's daughter's birthday seemed weird. Talking about how they had a real strong connection, that seems weird to me now. Also, the like living there while they were, that always just seemed weird to me, you know. But nothing ever came up about teenage girls or young children ever. I would have never ever suspected that. She already called the Kissimmee police department too, because you know, like the living there while they weren't together and them calling each other a couple seemed kind of weird to me, and kind of like, I don't know, is it a story?
Well, it is weird that she's saying that.
Did she know? Did she know they were doing stuff? And was the daughter gonna get both of them in trouble?
So we finish off there with the great question. Was there anything that you, when you were sitting around going, oh yeah, what about this? And he says, mostly, yeah, that cougar thing. Now, mostly that cougar thing, that means the cougar thing was the very top thing there. And then he goes on to describe the communication with Madeline. So it was mostly the cougar thing, which basically was someone saying, I'm not interested in this woman. Like, that happens all the time. So it was mostly that. And then we go into the communication with Madeline, and he describes Madeline differently, a lot of distance there. The being with, the communication with the ex-girlfriend's daughter. The being what? He doesn't finish that thought again. He pulls out of it and says something else. The being with the communication with the ex-girlfriend's daughter. Really, you know, she's called Madeline, but it's not just a daughter, it's the ex-girlfriend's daughter, creating big distance there verbally. Wanting to go back to your ex's house, again, focus on where he was living. To be at your ex-girlfriend's daughter's birthday seemed weird. So another weird thing coming up here, talking about how they had a real strong connection. That seems weird to me now. Now, I get that. That seems weird to me now. It's in the present tense. He also has the word now there. So what he's saying here is in retrospect, and it's coming through in his words. Tenses are very reliable. That does seem weird to him now. But then he goes on to say, yeah, like living there, why they were, that always just seemed weird to me. Now, what we have there is actually the relationship, and the whole thing seems weird now. He's come to see that as weird. It was the living arrangements that he thought seemed weird at the time, past tense there. That always seemed weird to me. But notice we've got that repetition of weird again. Seems weird to me now. That seemed weird to me. But, you know, nothing ever came up about teenage girls or young children ever. Now, what we have there is came up. I didn't suspect anything. It's that he never mentioned anything. Nothing ever came up about teenage girls or young children ever. And I would never, ever have suspected that. Now, ever, never, ever. He wants to be really hugely emphatic that none of this went on. And then he he says something, because I already called the Kissimmee Police Department. I don't know who called the Kissimmee Police Department. I think it was him. Two, because living there, and again, it's focused on the living arrangements, living there when they weren't together, and them calling each other a couple seemed kind of weird to me, and kind of like, I don't know, is it a story? So we just have the living arrangements again, and this really strange thing about were they a couple, weren't they a couple? He's never been very clear with all of that in his timeline. I don't know, is it a story? What is weird is she's saying that, and he says, did she know? This is Jen, I think. Did she know? Did she know they were doing stuff? And was the daughter going to get, get the both of them in trouble? Interesting way of phrasing it. It wouldn't be the daughter that got them in trouble. It would be the behaviour that got him in trouble. It would be the adults that got in trouble, not the daughter. But does he know something a little bit more there? Did she know? Did she know they were doing stuff? And was the daughter going to get, get both of them in trouble? Interesting ways of phrasing it. In that last section that we looked at there, just more weirdness coming through. Seemed weird. I think more curation as well, of him cherry picking what it is that he's going to tell us about Stephan Stearns. And does he know more? Does he know more? Does Frank know more about what was going on in Stephan Stearns? So there we go. We've had a listen to Stephan Stearns as described by his friend Frank. Now, what I wanted to get from that was what kind of person was Stephan Stearns, from someone who hung with them for 3 years before he murdered Madeline. And what do I get here? Well, this guy only saw weirdness from Stephan Stearns. As much as he tries to say a couple of times, normal and no signs, every single thing he describes around Stephan Stearns was weird. He wants to tell a different story now. He wants to say everything was all right. I just thought he was nerdy, but no, it was just the weirdness that came through. So what does he think of Stephan Stearns? Well, what he describes him as is a childish person with childish interests, maybe immature, definitely like a childlike type of person. Also notice uncompromising. Stephan Stearns doesn't seem to be willing to bend to fit in with anyone's life. He was very much, this is me, these are my Tamagotchis, this is what I'm into. I'm not going to go after this cougar woman as much as you try and persuade me. Always seem to be very uncompromising. Now, even if we take all of this at face value, I think what we can say is so many of the signs were there that Stearns wasn't a good person. And that's what I can get from Frank's words, that there were many, many signs there that when you put them all together, individually, they might not be so bad. But when you put them all together, Stephan Stearns did not come across to the adults that he was friends with as a normal person. Many red flags were available if the adults had chosen to look out for them. What do you think? Do let me know in the comments if you can, or get in touch on social media. NeverATruerWord.com is the website address. There you will find a lot more. You'll also find a playlist looking at other adults in the Madeline Soto case, and could they have done more. That's NeverATruerWord.com, and we'll see you soon for something new from Never a Truer Word.